Robert Craddock, welcome to the podcast in somber terms because it's 8:28 my time on Saturday morning. I woke up about 45 minutes ago to a flurry of text messages. My phone's been going off. I can't quite believe it. Shane Warne, the greatest bowler we've ever produced and an icon of Australian sport, has passed away. It's numbing. Where were you when you found out the news? How did it get to you, and what was your immediate reaction?
Yes, Tom. Well, like yourself, I know I was in the middle of the night. It was about 1 a.m. here, and I noticed I'd missed a lot of calls. So the first thing I did was go to the news websites, and there's very few times in your life where you're just damn bustingly shocked. And I have to say that was the case this morning, particularly after Rod Marsh's death, which we're all still getting used to, and the lingering sadness of that. But what a loss to his family, to cricket, to broadcasting, and the certainty that there'll never be another Warnie. There was no one quite like him beforehand, and there will be no one like him again, I'm sure.
I want to talk to you first of all, and this is very much on the run. I don't have a sheet in front of me with what we're going to talk about. I haven't really spoken to you about what we're going to talk about, but hopefully we can have a good, give a good tribute to Shane Warne's life, given that we both knew him somewhat, not as much as other people, but you would have spent years with him. I've certainly worked with him. What stood out for me when people said to me, what was Shane Warne like? I always talked about walking through Adelaide Airport with him, Crash, one day after a BBL game. It was just me and him. And it's like the seas parted. Everyone would look at him. Everyone knew who he was. He'd stop the whole way through and say good day to people. He was larger than life, and that term gets thrown around quite a bit, but he actually transcended sport, didn't he? People might not know who great cricketers were, but they all knew who Shane Warne was. And it was a sight to behold seeing him among other people, because that was when he was at his best. He was an extrovert. He loved it. And he knew that he was a big deal, but it's almost like he relished it in many ways. Now, I know that you've written that he got sick of it at times. That makes perfect sense as well. But Shane Warne, to me, was the most iconic Australian sports person of the 21st century. I can't think of anyone that would even come close to him.
And Tom, I sense we've almost forgotten how big he was when he was playing. I wrote about it today. Anna Kournikova, the most glamorous tennis player and athlete in the world. She was in Australia for the summer and wanted to meet Shane Warne. And out of the blue turned up at training at the SCG, and heads were turning, cameras were whirring. She wanted to meet Warne. He was extraordinary. So his level of fame transcended the game. And that's what I love about it. It took cricket to places where it doesn't normally get to. He was but he was a one-off. His former coach, Terry Jenner, got it dead right in 1993, where he said, this lad will inspire tens and thousands of people to bowl leg spin, and there's every chance we won't get one more of them in the test team because it's that hard. This guy is unique. He said he will have his bit and then he will go and there will be no one like him. And all these years later, those quotes still resonate. They were very good. They were really on point.
Warne was very close to lots of people that were famous around the world. Very good friends with Chris Martin and Elton John as well, Crash. Can you tell us about his relationship with these types?
Well, Elton John loved cricket. He would play tennis with Warnie. And I said to Warnie once, I heard that Elton said to you, if there was one other person in the world that I could be, it would be you, Shane. And he said, that's correct. And Mick Jagger made the same comment. Something like, how's that? But he was funny, Warnie wrestled with fame, Tom. There's no question. Yes, he liked most of it, but he did have times he fell out with it. Like in England during the 99 World Cup, he'd had enough. And we had quite a humorous exchange in the foyer one day where he said, boys, I've had enough of fame. I'm going back to be the kid from Black Rock. I'm reconnecting to me old mate. Some of the tradies now and whatever. And we said, Warnie, you sound pretty down. If you're reconnecting with, sort of the bare basics, why don't you come out to dinner with us? He said, no, I'm having dinner with Elton John. So much for turning your back on fame. And these are the sort of stories which brought, that's only Warnie could have that story, Tom. It's just incredible.
I get that this is not about you or me or us at all, this is about Warnie. But I think to paint a picture of Shane Warne myself, he was incredibly welcoming when he didn't know you. You know, I think Warnie had an amazing ability to be friendly and really open and trusting of others until he had a reason not to be. And if you lost him, then he'd completely blank you. That would be, and he blanked a number of people. Like, he was well off a number of people. But I played a round of golf in the summer with Michael Vaughan in Cheltenham, and on the way home, he got a text from Warnie saying, "Come and see my new place." And he'd sort of redeveloped this place in Cheltenham. It was like a shed, and he had memorabilia everywhere. In fact, you can see it on his documentary on Amazon. You know, he had stumps and jumpers and you know, literally a whole floor of memorabilia. And upstairs was like this dream room. There was a pool table. There was a you could play pinball. There was a 80-inch TV, an L-shaped couch. You know, big velvet blinds. You know, his famous painting on the wall. You know, that painting on the wall that he has of all you know, Chris Martin's in the painting. I can't quite remember who else. You know, but there's lots of famous people, and it was like his pad. And, you know, he was a good friend with Michael Vaughan, but I was just a colleague with him, and he invited me in. He offered me a drink. You know, he gave me a strong handshake, and he was one of the most welcoming people I've ever met. And it's just stuck with me that this is Shane Warne. This is not just any old person. This guy is he's known around the world for his cricketing feats, but those who actually know him can't get enough of him. They love spending time with him. They call him the king for a reason. So I'd love to hear your experience with Shane Warne when you first met him, and how that relationship developed over the journey. Because I got to say, Crash, I remember him clearly say, like, he spoke very fondly of you.
Yeah, look, it was just so interesting because when he came into Test cricket, he was a pudgy little kid, but just always had a bit about him, and he had confidence. Tom, I reckon there was things about him that not a lot of people gave him credit for. And one of them was, I'll never forget it, when the surgeons opened up his shoulder in 1999, they said, how in God's name has this bloke been bowling? But he bowled because he was strong and he knew Australia needed him. Like, all the players joke, Warnie on the physio table after a day was like the 80-year-old man. But I tell you what he could do. He was tough. His mother was of German extraction, and I reckon he got those German sporting genes. He was really, really tough. But he could also be, and this is surprising, for all of his confidence, he just needed reinforcement too.
Yep.
He could be that person, and I'll never forget it. During one-day games when he was captain at the MCG, he would ring up the Herald Sun phone sometimes during the lunch break and said, "What's the feedback like? You know, what are they saying about the captaincy?" You know what I mean? You wouldn't do it now. You couldn't do it with all the corruption vetting and all that. But he would get on the dressing room phone and ring. Like, that's you think of that now in the middle of a game, because he'd say, one of the Herald Sun guys who he was mates with would say, "Oh, Bill Laurie reckons it was a really good move to bring so-and-so Paul Rifle on first over." Yeah, I thought of that, you know. So mid-match reinforcement from the king, it was quite funny. But but one of my, and this is a small thing, but I loved one day in England, the 1993 tour, just after he bowled the Gadding ball, and they used to let kids on the field on the lunch break. And I remember once there was about 24 of them just bowling leg spin together. And you could just see then this bushfire was taking off. Leg spin, which was dormant in the 1980s, was exploding in the 90s. And it was gorgeous to watch, Tom, I have to say.
So let's celebrate Shane Warne, the cricketer. He's clearly Australia's finest ever bowler, 708 test wickets. I'm sure you were there. I was there for his 700th at the MCG. The 05 Ashes sticks out in my memory, but the way that he was able to continually win test matches for Australia in the fourth innings was quite remarkable. And if you look at his highlights from earlier in his career, Crash, and I remember because I've only watched this documentary very recently and it sort of refreshed some memories, but he would get guys with flippers and even wrong-uns, big spinning deliveries. But it seems like toward the end of his career, I know Andrew Strauss was a big spinning leg spinner from around the wicket, but he would get guys. He would get batsmen out with guile, and subtleties that he didn't necessarily have 10 years. So a bit like Dennis Lilly reshaping himself after he hurt his back, Shane Warne redefined himself after his shoulder injuries.
Yeah, the flipper to Shane Warne, beautiful ball that it is, was a bit like a temperamental girlfriend who you love her because she's hard to control. And that was Warney in the flipper. He loved the ball because Richie Beno bowled it, and you'd see him in airports talking about it. We'll love that flipper. You know, it was like the red wine to them. But he knew that by just his stock leg break mixed up with straight balls and sliders, that he could get a brilliant feed, and that's what he did. Tom, one of his secret traits was no sportsman I've ever met had the ability to put his problems, hang them on the fence as he was walking on the field, and then go on and just concentrate on a game plan.
Yeah.
And that 2005 Ashes tour, we were at Lord's pre-match training before the first test, and he said to Terry Jenner, I've just split up with Simone. I'm feeling terrible. I'm bowling rubbish. I'll be lucky to take 10 wickets this series. And he took 40. I mean, he just had this way of insulating himself against his problems. I saw him in a test in England in 1993. The tabloids had done a story with one of his ex-girlfriends.
Yeah.
And I was in the dining room when he opened the page to it. And I had to look at him. I thought, what's Warney going to do? And he looked at it and just thought, yeah, he didn't enjoy it. But he just kept on with his cereal and went out and bowled beautifully. He could do that. Many couldn't, Tom. Many couldn't. They could not separate private and public, and it destroyed him. Warney somehow could. Amazing.
His performance in the semi-final of the 99 World Cup, I think, is often forgotten because he didn't take a fifer.
Yeah.
I think he took 4 against South Africa, but that game was gone. That game was slipping away. It was a tie in the end. And it's well known for Alan Donald and Lance Klusener at the end, and Paul Rifles dropped catch and Damien Fleming. But Shane Warne, without Shane Warne, Australia wouldn't have made the 99 World Cup final.
Well,
sorry. While I've got you, that period, he got dropped in the West Indies. He was struggling in the World Cup, and then he bowled Australia to victory in that to the 99 World Cup final. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, do you know what? He had his shoulder operation, went to the West Indies, and McGill was bowling better. I actually still remember getting a call from him in my hotel room during the 99 World Cup, and he said, look, I'm just seeking neutral opinion. Am I a better bowler than McGill? Like, really? And I said, you are, but your form's just not quite right. And he went to England, and honestly, it seemed as if there was problems in the team and everything like that. But he bowled like a genius. It roused him. He thought, I'm going to go down swinging here. And he always had South Africa in the head, I reckon, when it really mattered. And the last thing about him was, when the big moments are on the line in sport, there's two sorts of players. There's the don't look at me, I'd rather someone else took the kick at goal. Or there's the, hey, I'll have the ball, thanks. I'll sort this. And he was an I'll sort this sort of guy. That was one of his greatest strengths, Tom. That desire to be the hero. It was there all the time. It was quite magnificent, really.
It's a different era, isn't it? I can't imagine. I mean, it might happen, but players calling journalists in their hotel room to ask for neutral opinion it's quite incredible, and it just shows that he did seek reassurance. Often during, again, this is a very small anecdote, but during the BBL coverage, he would come down at half time and I'd be on the boundary and he would say, what do you think of that? Like, did I get that right? Was my analysis? He's asking me what his analysis is. It's completely skewed because he's the former cricketer. I'm the reporter on the sidelines. And people would say, well, is Shane Warne lonely? But he had so many friends and so many people he could speak to. He loved his life. And this is why it's so heartbreaking to hear what happened overnight in Thailand.
Yeah. It's a good point, Tom. I have to say, I spoke to an old mate of his who's a former cricketer who went out a couple of years ago with him, and they played together. And Warney said to him, he dropped his guard late at night and said, you know what, I'm still searching.
Yeah.
And he said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, I'm happy. I love my family. I love my life. I love England. I love Australia. I'll never have to work again if I don't want to. He said, but there's just something missing. He said, I just haven't quite found myself yet, and it was only a run of about 3 or 4 sentences, but it was there and he meant it. And I know the guy who he spoke to, and I thought that was significant because for all the friendships that Warnie had and so many, big name people like, Chris Martin, Ed Sheeran and all these people. But there was that he was forever on the move. He had the busiest diary you've ever seen. But there was just maybe that anchor missing. Maybe that's the way to describe it, Tom.
Yeah, that's well said. Our thoughts do go out to his family and his close friends as well. I'm struggling to come to terms with it, Crash. Very, very difficult to compare to anything else. Clearly people die every day in all walks of life, and sometimes they're close to you and sometimes they're not. But this is so sudden, and he wasn't a big drinker, which is often a misconception. People thought that he was a big partier and big drinker. He was not a big drinker, was he?
No, and look, I'll give him credit for 2 things here, Tom. One, I never saw Shane Warne in any sort of barroom incident or with any barroom unrest. And you think of the drunken people who approached him over the years, like by the thousands, who did handle that part of it well. I have to say that, Warnie was involved in a lot of controversies. That wasn't one of them. And the drinking part was a key to it. Damien Fleming once said to me he'd never seen Warnie drunk, and he grew up with him. Yeah. And I remember one night Darren Lehman was charged with being the Warnie shadow to go around after him and just see how much per night Shane Warne actually drank. And it was something like 2 glasses of wine.
Yeah.
Even though Warnie, and there was quite a funny thing when Jonathan Brown came in the Australian rooms one year, and Warnie said, "Have a beer, Brownie." "Oh, I've one myself. Yeah, I love one after a day's play." And the boy said, "What? Warnie having a beer?" So they playfully then, for the rest of the days of the test, put a beer out for Warnie. As if say, "Oh, mate, there's that beer that you always have after day's play." I got to say, I did love that one. How cricket sense of humour is so subtle. "Oh, there's that beer that you always have with Brownie. You can have with us now, mate, if you like." Yeah. "Oh, no, not interested."
All right. Just broadly speaking, how will Shane Warne be remembered, do you think, as an Australian cricketer and an Australian person?
A man who breathed totally irreplaceable. A man who no one had seen the likes of before him. No one will see the likes of him since. A total one-off. A showman, a conjurer, a pot stirrer, a debonair. A man who fell into cricket because his little AFL dabble didn't work out with St Kilda. Fearless in some ways, a bit insecure in others, but endlessly absorbing, and certainly, I think you'd have to say, the most interesting Australian cricketer ever. Yeah, I mean that's the bottom line. I mean, we put it this way: if we were charged with talking until midday today about Shane Warne, we'd get there.
Would find a way. Well, this is a shattering day, Crash. I think you've done an amazing job to, I guess, spin this, pardon the pun, and put his life in a positive light. Tribute in a way that celebrates what he was able to achieve. But it is, by and large, a really sad day for everyone at Fox Cricket, everyone who knew Shane Warne. I'm shattered myself. I'm sure you are too. So I really appreciate your time. Thanks again. You've written a fantastic story for the Herald Sun and Courier Mail. Before I let you go, I want people to go read that story, but how come you went about it the way you did?
Well, I just sort of thought, let's talk about Shane Warne, the character, and what he was. Just let's put little stories in there, about how meeting Elton John and what he was like, and volunteering when there was a group of parents stranded in South Africa and said, "Oh, we can hire a plane, but that's very costly." And he said, "Just leave that to me." What is it? How many thousand? 7,000. There you go. Thank you. Like just as if he was throwing open his wallet, So I just thought, from being on the road with the guy, Tom, you could put the little things in that made him special. Not that we all know his record, we all know the ball of the century. And I didn't even mention the baked beans anecdote in India, where
Please
they
do.
sent. Well, I was in a pool with Errol Orcott, the physio, and I said, "Any stories doing?" And he said, "No, mate, nothing. Everyone's fine. But I've got to go anyway because I've got to send an emergency telegram or email to Australia to get Shane Warne some baked beans to save him from the threat of undernourishment." So when it got there, Heinz and the other baked bean manufacturer saw this and seized on it and sent these giant pallets over. Like, honestly, you couldn't fit them in the back of a truck because they thought this would be fabulous publicity. And Warnie went well on the test, and both the manufacturers claimed credit. And Warnie rang us up in the room and said, "Oh, mate, you've made us look silly with that thing." Fair dinkum. Honestly, I'm just so embarrassed by it. And I said, "So you're not touching the beans?" He said, "No, I'm taking a few cans, but you still made us feel bad." And then the tour finished. He went to the off season, and sure enough, there it was. 2 months later, Warnie signed a 5-figure contract with the baked bean company to promote him, of which I got nothing, Tom. So but they were great days, and I'm trying to lighten the mood here, Tom, because we're all in a state of shock. But I think it's important we remember and we pay tribute to the character and the legend and the irreplaceable man that he was.
Thanks, Crash.
Pleasure.